Good evening, everyone, and welcome back to Whispers at Night. Tonight we're clocking in for the graveyard shift, exploring the unsettling quiet that descends after the world has gone to sleep. We have a massive collection of 20 chilling, real-life accounts from people who work while the rest of us dream. Nurses, security guards, and factory workers who know the true meaning of being alone in the dark. These aren't just spooky stories. They're first-hand testimonies from ordinary people who have seen and heard things that don't belong in the quiet hours. Each one reached out because they need you to know that when the lights go out, something else wakes up. If you're new, subscribe and ring the bell, because real terror has a way of punching the clock when you least expect it. I used to work as a security guard for a small startup company, although I was never quite sure what exactly the company did. My role was simply to monitor security, and the office itself was tiny and pretty unassuming, like any typical small office. Honestly, I always found it kind of strange that they even felt the need to hire a security guard for such a small space. The job was easy, at least. I didn't have to patrol multiple floors throughout the night because the office fit on one floor. My routine was straightforward. I'd arrive at 9 o'clock p.m., turn on the security alarm systems, and then head to the little security room where all the camera screens were set up. The cameras were mostly outdoors and offered very low-quality images. The first few hours passed slowly, nothing unusual happening, but around 1 o'clock a.m., I thought I heard what sounded like the clicking of a latch. I froze for a moment, confused, before standing up and opening the door to the hallway. It looked exactly as I had left it. 3 doors down the hall, all still closed. Curious, I walked along and opened each door, quickly glancing inside. The rooms were filled with office desks, but everything appeared normal. Still wondering if I might have just misheard the noise, I returned to the security room, leaving the door open this time, so if I heard the sound again, I'd hear it more clearly. I checked the camera footage from the past few minutes to see if I missed anything, but I saw no movement outside. 20 minutes passed, and I resigned myself to the idea that maybe I imagined the noise. Then suddenly, I heard the faint sound of a door opening slowly down the hallway. I jumped up and hurried down the hall, hardly believing what I was hearing. One of the doors was cracked open. Knowing none of the alarms had gone off and nothing showed on the cameras, I was completely confused. I was sure nobody would be inside. Carefully, I crept over and opened the door a bit further. The room was dark. I stepped inside, hearing nothing, so I moved deeper in, walking past several desks. Then, at the back of the room, I noticed slight movement, a shadow or something similar. I turned just in time to lock eyes with a man crouched under a desk. He had black hair and large, dark circles under his eyes. His expression was a mix of fear and anger, as if he was both furious and worried that I'd found him. The moment we made eye contact, he started to stand up. I had no idea if he was armed, so I didn't take any chances and ran for my life. I bolted out into the hallway and then flew through the front doors, which triggered the security alarms and automatically alerted the police. I moved to a safe distance and tried to watch for the man as I waited for the officers. Within 30 seconds, the door swung open and the man sprinted out. He ran around to the other side of the building, and from there, I lost sight of him. When the police arrived, we downloaded all the footage from the night, but there was no recording of the man entering the building. We had no idea when or how he got inside. The big question remained, why did he break in? After talking with the company, they said they knew nothing about the incident and hadn't discovered anything missing. Still, I suspected they knew more than they admitted. It's not normal to pay for security at a tiny startup office unless there's a specific reason. My guess was that the intruder might have been a former employee who was mentally unstable. I stayed at the company for a few more months, but eventually quit after finding a better job. I never learned any more about what really happened that night. It was during our school's winter break, just the day after Christmas, and I was pulling shifts at the town's pizza shop, a place nearly every kid from my school worked at. Back then, every paycheck felt like a fortune, and I was always eager to say yes whenever they needed me. I thought this particular night wouldn't be hectic. After all, everyone would be home with their families, right? I could not have been more wrong. Around dinner time, the shop had filled to capacity. All the indoor seats were taken, the place buzzing with orders flying out the door. The pace was frantic. My job was simple: greet customers, seat them, or make deliveries when needed. Around 8 p.m. my manager told me to start making deliveries. I grabbed a quick order, then back in no time, I had another pizza loaded up and hit the road. This delivery was to a house about 20 minutes away. What struck me first was how empty the roads were. Not the usual neighborhood bustle, but a haunted stillness. Snow was gently falling, almost invisible except for the gleam under streetlights. It was almost peaceful. I drove carefully, the quiet and cold pressing in as I tried to soak in the strange atmosphere, my mind half on home and half on the warmth waiting for me back at the shop. When I finally arrived, the address wasn't your typical suburban street. The house sat isolated, just off the side of the road, down a long gravel driveway flanked by snow-covered trees. Christmas decorations were everywhere, light strands coiling up the porch, wreaths hung on every window, inflatable Santas waving silently in the wind. But their stark contrast to the surrounding quiet unsettled me. The driveway hadn't even been cleared of snow. Parking without getting stuck was a challenge, but I managed. As I stepped out with the pizza box, I noticed something odd. The outdoor lights and Christmas decorations blazed with life, but the house itself was dead silent. Not a single light on inside, not even a flicker from behind the curtains. Yet, fresh shoe prints in the snow trailed right up to the door. I assumed they belonged to the homeowners. Curious, I walked toward the porch, but then saw those same shoe prints veer off, circling around the side of the house, avoiding the front door altogether. A chill crawled up my spine, but I brushed it off. Maybe the owners had stepped outside for a moment. I knocked once. No answer. 30 seconds passed. I knocked again. Nothing but the soft whistle of the wind accompanied by falling snowflakes. Then a third time. Still silence. I double-checked the receipt. Yes, payment was required. Shivering, slightly frustrated, I knocked one final, loud time, shaking the entire porch. Still no response. Giving up, I turned away and made my way back to the car. When I climbed in and tried to start the engine, it sputtered and stalled, over and over. My breath fogged against the cold interior, my fingers trembling as I cursed under my breath and frantically turned the key, trying to coax the old engine to life. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw a figure standing in the shadowed yard. Fully bundled up in boots, thick jacket, snow pants, everything, and coldly still. On instinct, I hopped out calling, "Hey, did you order pizza? I've been knocking for 5 minutes." The figure didn't respond, just began slowly walking toward me. The pace eerily measured, like they knew I couldn't just drive away. Panic began to churn in my gut. I scrambled back into the driver's seat, heart hammering. The way they moved, no rush, no hurry, made it crystal clear. This wasn't someone waiting for their food. Something was wrong. I fumbled with my phone, fingers too numb to dial quickly. As I hit the emergency number, the officer on the other end asked what the emergency was. Just then, the man leaned close to my window and spoke in a deep, low voice, asking if I needed help. My blood ran cold. How could he possibly know that? That confirmed my worst fears. I told the officer what I could, describing my location, trying not to shake too visibly. Outside, the man's gaze was sharp, his impatience growing. He started moving faster now, glancing around like hunting for a way in, through the house or my car. It didn't matter. I sat frozen, the thin glass between us my only shield. Abruptly, he reached into his pocket, searching desperately for something. Panic writhed across his face when he couldn't find whatever he was looking for. With a sudden burst of frustration, he punched at my window, rattling the glass, before taking off toward the side of the house like he was after a weapon. 2 agonizing minutes ticked by as I sat in silence, debating whether to try to start the car again or make a run for it on foot. Then flashing red and blue lights burst into the night stillness. At that exact moment, the man reappeared, brandishing something clasped in his right hand. Seeing the police, he bolted. What became clear later was chilling. The man didn't live there. The owners had gone away for the holidays. He had plugged in those Christmas decorations outside, creating an illusion that the house was occupied. While I was knocking, he tampered with my car, something under it to keep the engine from starting. I'm no mechanic, but from what I understand, it was deliberate sabotage. The most terrifying thought of all was that he'd planned to kidnap me. By sheer luck, he had dropped whatever tool he needed to break my car window. That's probably what made him run back. And that tool was never found. After that night, I quit deliveries. It was a pretty typical night in the middle of March when I found myself working a late shift at the gas station. Usually, I covered afternoon shifts, but every now and then I'd fill in for someone on the overnight. That day, I got a call in the morning, overtime from 10 p.m. to 8 a.m., and the pay was good, so I jumped at it without hesitation. When I arrived and took over for the manager, I settled behind the counter, the rain pouring relentlessly outside. The weather forecast had warned of a major storm rolling in, which seemed to keep most people off the roads. My usually busy gas station was eerily dead. After sitting inside for about an hour, I grabbed my raincoat and dashed outside to batten down the hatches. There were loose signs and empty soda crates tossed around near the pumps, and I hustled back and forth, bringing everything inside piece by piece. That's when I noticed him. A man standing by the side of the road, pacing nervously under the pouring rain. He was soaked to the bone, wandering back and forth like he was waiting for someone. Odd, but I just figured he was hitchhiking or waiting for a ride. I finished tidying up and went back inside. About 2 hours later, the distant rumble of thunder rolled in, growing closer and louder until it exploded overhead. The storm was no joke. The wind howled so fiercely it shook the entire building. At one terrifying moment, the front doors blew open with such force I thought they might rip off their hinges. I rushed over and slid the boat lock into place to hold them shut, then scurried toward the back storage room, away from all the windows, and settled in, hoping to make it through the night safely. About half an hour into the storm's peak, as the rain pounded the roof like a relentless drum, I caught the faintest sound over the chaos. Someone banging on the front doors. At first I thought maybe it was the wind or debris slamming, but then I heard it again, slower and more deliberate. Someone was trying to get inside. Heart pounding, I left my hiding spot and walked down the sales floor to the entrance. Peering out, I saw a drenched figure banging on the glass, their desperate eyes locked with mine. Without hesitation, I unlocked the door, expecting to help a lost or injured person. He came inside in a rush, water cascading from his soaked jacket in heavy drops that pooled on the floor. But he didn't say thank you. He didn't even speak. Instead, he started pacing back and forth across the store, his eyes blank and hollow, like a man trapped in some dark place. It was the same guy I'd seen wandering outside hours ago, pacing in the rain like a restless ghost. I tried asking if he was okay, or if I should call for help, but he kept walking, never making eye contact, never responding, just that empty, haunted expression. After a few minutes, my unease escalated to full-blown fear. I moved toward the counter to grab the phone and call the police, but the moment I touched the receiver, his head snapped up and his eyes locked onto mine, dark and furious. I caught my breath and noticed his knuckles, raw, bloody, bruised like he'd been striking something hard, over and over. He growled, his voice low and menacing. "Don't." It wasn't a question. It was a warning aimed straight at me for dialing the cops. Not wanting to test him any further, I quietly put the phone down. For what felt like an eternity, he paced silently, mindless fury burning behind tired eyes, while the storm threw everything it had outside. Thunder shaking the building, rain lashing the windows like knives. I considered my options. I could try to bolt out through the front, but I'd have to unlock the door and hope I was faster than him in this storm. Or I could try calling for help and pray he'd just leave. Both options seemed like a death wish. So, I did the scariest thing. I did nothing. I stood frozen and watched him pace, every second feeling like a year. I didn't even breathe too hard. Then, after what might have been 20 minutes, he stopped, stood still, gave me one last icy glare, and walked deliberately to the door. He slid the bolt open and stepped back out into the storm's fury. The instant he was gone, I rushed to the phone and dialed 911. But by the time the police finally arrived, over half an hour later, he had vanished into the night. The next day, I learned that the police had filed a report about a missing woman. A woman who never came home from work the night before. She disappeared after leaving her office at 11 p.m. Maybe it's a stretch. Maybe it's nothing at all. But the man I saw had those bleeding knuckles, signs of violence or struggle. The timeline fits. I can't shake the feeling that those two events are connected. I wasn't there to stop it. I was just stuck in the middle of a storm, pacing footsteps, and a man whose blank eyes still haunt my thoughts. This happened just about a month ago, late September, right in the middle of a stretch where it seemed like it rained non-stop. It was pouring down, sheets of water hammering the city. I work as an outdoor security guard for a warehouse on the outskirts, and let me tell you, rain doesn't make the job any easier. Thankfully, my company lets me stay inside on the really bad nights, but it always makes the shift drag on. Instead of patrolling the lot, I'm stuck planted by the glass entrance doors, eyes scanning, mostly just waiting and trying not to fall asleep. That night, I got in around 9 p.m., locking up after the last employees left. The rain was relentless, drumming on the building, lightning flashing in the distance. I stood by the door, half listening to thunder, fighting off drowsiness. Hours passed like that. I leaned against the wall, took a few bathroom breaks, nothing much happening. Then it came, a deep, heavy, creaking thud that echoed through every corner of the warehouse. At first I thought maybe I was imagining it, but no. It sounded like bending metal or a massive door scraping open. It sent a shiver right up my spine. With a tightening in my chest, I knew I had to check it out. It was part of the job, after all, even if it felt like walking into a nightmare. The warehouse is huge and confusing. I'd never really explored much, since I usually worked outside. I only knew the main hallway that branched off into 5 or 6 corridors, each leading to cavernous open storage areas. Slowly, I walked down the hallway, taking in the shadowed passages. I checked each corridor, empty. Then I reached the very last one. There, a cold feeling washed over me. The door at the far end was cracked open just a fraction. I hesitated. Couldn't tell if it had been left that way or someone had forced it. Swallowing hard, I stepped closer and pushed the door open a little wider. Darkness wallowed the room whole. My voice cracked as I called out, "Hello!" Silence. I stepped back, starting to close the door, when I caught it, the low murmur of a voice. A sound, half mumbled, half laughing softly. It seemed to float from the shadows near the tall shelving units. "Is someone there?" I called again, voice trembling. "What the hell are you doing here?" "Come here," the voice whispered, soft, insistent. "What?" I replied, inching backward. "Come here," stronger this time. I couldn't see a thing in the darkness. My heart pounded as I slowly said, "This is off limits." I shut the door quickly, then grabbed my radio and called the police. I left the building through the front as rain hammered the windows harder than ever. 5 minutes later, sirens cut through the storm. Cops stormed the warehouse, but they came out shaking their heads. No sign of anyone. Later, security footage came back. The grainy black and white showed a man, mid-50s, dark jacket, slipping in through a gap in one of the back garage doors. From there, he made his way to the very warehouse room where I'd heard him. Most disturbing was that on the tape, He held something, a knife, or something sharp and small in one hand. Then, just as quickly as he came, he left. Nobody knows why he broke in, or what twisted game he was playing by calling me into the warehouse. It all felt surreal, like some dark trap. Maybe this sounds weak, or like I just lost my nerve, but after that night, I quit. I took a day job. I can't say I blame myself. About 4 years ago, in late October, I started a new job working the overnight shift at a gas station. My friends were throwing a big Halloween party on the 31st, but because I was so new, I hadn't accrued any vacation time yet. So, unfortunately, I was stuck working that night. At least I got most of the day off to hand out candy and watch some movies, pretending it wasn't a huge bummer. I showed up for work at 8 p.m. and the streets were almost deserted. No cars buzzing by. Most kids were out running around, trick-or-treating. I hoped the gas station would be slow, and thankfully, that's exactly what I got. During the first hour, only a couple dozen cars pulled in, and by around 10 p.m., it slowed to a crawl. Even the roads around the station were empty and quiet. Every 15 minutes or so, I'd see a police car cruising down the road. But other than that, the neighborhood was dead. I was all right with the slow pace, though scrolling through my phone and watching friends post pictures of their Halloween fun made me feel a little left out. To distract myself, I grabbed some boxes from the back to start restocking shelves. Then, as I was turning around from stocking, my back was to the front door when I heard the little bell jingle. I turned to see 3 men walking inside, wearing full Halloween costumes, masks and all. One was decked out as Michael Myers, and the other 2 I didn't recognize, probably some typical spooky characters. It was obvious they weren't kids. They were full-grown adults. One even had a long beard sticking out from under his mask and tattoos crawling up his neck. I greeted them politely, but they barely acknowledged me. Just a quick glance here and there. Maybe they were trying to stay in character. I really don't know. One weird thing was that they kept their masks on the entire time. I moved to the checkout counter to wait while they quietly dared the aisles. I noticed something strange. There were no cars outside. That explained why I hadn't heard any engines when they pulled in. They spent a few minutes scanning the candy aisle, then tossed a bag of dum-dum lollipops onto the counter. No words, no smiles, nothing. I scanned the bag and told them the total. They paid in cash without a word. As I rang it up, I couldn't shake the feeling from one of the men in the back. Behind the mask, I caught his eyes locked on me, burning with frustration or anger. I don't know how else to describe it, but it made my skin crawl. Trying to keep it casual, I finished the transaction and told them to have a good night. There was a tense pause, and then one of the men suddenly walked up to the front door and slammed the bolt lock down. My stomach dropped. The man who had been staring at me didn't hesitate. He came around the counter and shoved me hard to the ground. I froze but tried to stay calm. I told them to take the money, that I wouldn't resist. But the other man was already circling past the register. They weren't here for the cash. Before I knew it, he was forcing zip ties onto my hands, tightening them until I couldn't move my fingers. They dragged me up to my feet, completely helpless, and pulled me through the store. As they rushed me toward the exit, I caught sight of an old car parked in the grass just outside the lot. Then, suddenly, a blazing spotlight swept over us. It was a police car pulling into the parking lot. The 3 men dropped me hard onto the pavement and tore off, sprinting to their car. I don't know if their car wouldn't start, or if they just gave up, but the officers managed to catch them before they could get away. Backup arrived within seconds. Apparently, earlier that same night, police had received reports about 3 men in costumes roaming around the neighborhood, handing out candy to kids and trying to lure them away from their homes. That's why I kept seeing patrol cars circling the area. What they wanted to do with me or those kids wasn't ever made clear. None of the men said a word. Their silence only left terrifying questions. In a strange way, I'm almost grateful for the way that night went down. Had I sold them that candy and later found out it was being used to kidnap children, I don't think I'd ever have forgiven myself. But it didn't have to go that way. It was around 11 p.m. and I was on my way to deliver an order from the sandwich shop where I worked. The night was quiet, my music playing softly in the car as I drove through familiar streets, just running through the motions. I pulled up to a red light at an intersection, and there was nobody else around. But for some reason, the light stubbornly stayed red, hanging there longer than normal. I sat, staring, waiting for it to change. A car pulled up beside me. I glanced over for just a second, trying to avoid awkward eye contact. Their windows were heavily tinted, far darker than what's legal, and I couldn't see a single thing inside. The car was black too, maybe an old Toyota or something like that. I couldn't quite place it. A cold pit grew in my stomach. I don't know if it was because we were the only two cars on the road or something else, but I got a really uneasy feeling. Eventually the light changed and I started moving. But just as I did, I noticed the car beside me hadn't budged. It was still parked there, lingering at the intersection like a shadow. I shrugged it off, telling myself it had to be nothing. Maybe the driver had gotten distracted, but the feeling wouldn't leave. A few minutes later, I pulled off into the area where the delivery was supposed to be. I hesitate to call it a neighborhood. It was more like a line of 10 or so houses, all leading dead end. That only added to the eerie vibe. What unsettled me most was that not a single house had a light on. Not one. I would have thought the whole street was abandoned if the houses hadn't looked so pristine. Nice-looking homes with perfectly kept lawns and no signs of decay or neglect. I told myself it was probably just a coincidence that every resident had their lights off. The address was for the second-to-last house on that strange street. I parked on the curb and grabbed the order, walking up to the port. Shush, hush. I was hoping, at the very least, for some faint glow of light inside the windows. But standing there on the porch, all I saw was total darkness. Reluctantly, I knocked on the door. As I did, it swung slightly on its hinges. It wasn't properly shut or locked. Now that was even more unsettling. "Sandwich delivery. Anyone home?" I called out softly. Complete silence. No footsteps, no voices, no sounds at all. I was pretty sure I was going to leave, but just to be sure, I carefully cracked the door open a little more. Inside, I could see a hallway and a room beyond, but it was empty. No furniture, no decorations, not even a single picture hung on the walls. Dust motes drifted through the doorway as I peered in. I closed the door quickly and backed away, confusion swirling in my mind. Slightly worried now, I walked back to my car. That's when my eyes caught something a few houses back. A small black car, the one I definitely hadn't seen when I first pulled in. Its headlights were off, the windows were tinted. The moment I saw it, my face went pale. I knew. There was no way this was coincidence. I started hurrying toward my car, heart hammering. But just a few feet from the road, something in the reflection of one of the windows stopped me cold. It moved. I was near the passenger door when I spotted it. Through the window's dark tint, something blocked the back seat's window. It took me just a second to realize what I was looking at. Adrenaline exploded through my veins. I turned and bolted back toward the house, my only shelter. As I ran, the back door of my car suddenly swung open. A man in a black hoodie and black pants burst out, sprinting after me. But terrifyingly, he didn't chase me. He ran straight down to the road and jumped into that black car. I stayed frozen on the porch, heart thrumming like a wild drum. I fumbled with my phone, hands trembling, and dialed 911. At that point, I probably could have jumped into my car and driven away. But I was too scared. My mind was a jumble, unable to think straight. The police arrived fast, taking the situation seriously. What they told me shook me to my core. That entire street was unoccupied. New builds, yes, but completely empty. That explained the strange stillness, the lights always off, the silence. But they also surprised me with another fact. There had been multiple reports in the past week of similar attempts. A man ordering deliveries with fake names and addresses, then following the drivers. Mine was the closest call anyone had come to. This man had snuck inside my car and was waiting for me to get in and maybe drive away with me. What his intentions were, I'll never know. Sadly, there have been no updates, no arrests. But I still see that black car in the corner of my eye sometimes, and I swear I feel those eyes behind the mask staring right through me. My name's Trevor, and I'm a freshman in college. I'm lucky. My family supports me, so I don't have a ton of bills to worry about, but I still have to cover my own food and the random stuff I want to do with friends. To help out, I do Uber Eats occasionally, just enough to afford those extras. I drive an old battered Honda Accord. Honestly, it belongs in a scrapyard, but it's gotten me this far, so I roll with it. That night, after a couple of hours delivering, it was around 10 p.m. when I picked up an order from Wendy's. On the surface, nothing seemed off. I drove about 15 minutes down a mostly empty highway until I took a turn off onto a gravel road that led deep into a forest. There were no streetlights out there, just pitch darkness. My car's headlights barely cut through the thick night. They were dim to the point where I could only see about 10 feet ahead. I was creeping along, careful not to miss anything. After maybe a minute, the road abruptly ended. I glanced at my Uber Eats app. It said I'd arrived, but I didn't see a house, nothing. I stepped out of the car and took a few tentative steps in front of my headlights, looking for a path or driveway, but all I saw were endless trees and endless darkness. Panic started creeping in. Had I missed a turn somewhere? Maybe the GPS was wrong. I turned back toward my car and opened the door, still holding the Wendy's bag awkwardly. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I caught a dim light flickering far back in the woods. A small, faint glow nestled between the trees. It wasn't moving. At first, I thought it might be a porch light. I walked a few steps closer to get a better look, but the light wasn't bright enough to illuminate anything around it. It was just the light itself, glowing in the blackness. I stood there for a minute, frozen awkwardly with the bag in my hands, unsure whether I should approach. Then, suddenly, the light shifted. It disappeared behind one of the thick tree trunks and never reappeared. My heart started pounding. If that was the person who ordered the food, what the hell were they doing out here? I took a few careful steps backward toward my car, unease turning to dread. That's when I heard it, the crunch of leaves, somewhere just ahead, moving closer. I couldn't see anything through the thick darkness, only empty space between the trees. Fear hit me like a hammer. I dropped the Wendy's bag on the passenger seat and slammed the door shut. My old car groaned and struggled, taking way too long to start. But with trembling hands, I finally got it running. I made a slow, tense three-point turn and began driving back down the gravel road. As I glanced to the side, the headlights caught movement. A man sprinting through the woods, cutting straight towards the road, like he wanted to block me. I pushed the gas, lucky to get past him just in time. Honestly, I'm not sure my beat-up Honda could have stopped or swerved in time if he'd jumped out. The rest of the drive back was heavy silence, the empty gravel road swallowed in shadows. When I finally reached the highway, relief poured over me. I ended my shift and drove straight home. Later, out of curiosity and worry, I looked up that area on Google Maps. There weren't any houses. Zero. Just an abandoned gravel road, a dead end swallowed by dense forest. I don't know what kind of nightmare I drove into that night, or how many eyes were watching me from those trees. All I know is I was lucky to get out alive. During a period in my life when I was mostly living on the road, I made a decent living from house sitting and dog sitting. It was easy to find temporary gigs like that, and sometimes it meant staying in some really nice places for days or even weeks. One week, I was scheduled to dog and house sit for a place in Washington. I drove up on a Thursday and met the owners and their dog, a big golden retriever named Apple. She was incredibly friendly and affectionate right from the start. Only an hour after I arrived, the owners left for their vacation. With them gone, I decided to explore the house a little to get more comfortable, since I was going to be there for 5 or 6 days. The house was enormous, tucked away in a remote part of the national forest. Honestly, it was probably worth at least $1 million. It felt surreal to be staying there. That first day, I played with Apple, gradually getting used to the place. After dinner, I took her out for a walk, just as the sun was slowly setting. The road we walked along was peaceful, surrounded entirely by woods. Not a single other house was visible anywhere. We walked for about 15 minutes before turning back toward the house. As we neared the driveway, I noticed a man walking down it. He kept his head down and said nothing as he passed by. He looked to be about 30, with short black hair and baggy jeans. The driveway was long, about 3 minutes of walking just from the road to the house, and there were no other houses anywhere nearby. So where the hell could this guy have been coming from, if not the house? I hurried Apple inside and locked all the doors, just to be safe. I tried to shrug it off, convincing myself he was probably just someone exploring the woods who happened to stumble out onto the driveway. But I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling. Nothing else happened that day, and I went to bed around 10 p.m. The next day was uneventful. I stayed inside mostly, relaxing with Apple and watching movies while eating leftovers. But that night, I decided to stay up late. The house had this incredible upstairs balcony with a fire pit, so after the sun set, I lit a campfire and sat in a lounge chair. Apple stayed with me for a while, but eventually went back inside to her bed. About 30 minutes later, maybe around 11:30 p.m., I suddenly heard Apple start barking, but it wasn't her usual friendly bark. It was frantic and urgent. Startled, I jumped to my feet and ran inside. Apple was still barking, coming from the opposite side of the upstairs hallway. I looked down the hall and saw a door to a spare bedroom wide open. Inside, Apple stood with her tail tucked between her legs, staring fixedly in one direction. I called her name softly, but she kept barking. I hurried into the room, adrenaline rushing through me, and moved cautiously toward the open door. I slowly cracked it open. Inside was pitch black. I couldn't find the light switch right away. It was a large walk-in closet, stuffed with clothes hanging everywhere. Then, through a small gap between the garments, my eyes locked onto something terrifying, a single eye staring straight back at me. I froze, then slammed the door shut as fast as I could. I heard a rustling sound as clothes inside the closet shifted. I grabbed Apple's collar tightly and rushed downstairs, not daring to look back. I got in my car, hands shaking so badly I barely managed the steering wheel, and drove away. I called 911 the moment I felt safe enough. When the police arrived 10 minutes later, I waited anxiously as they searched the house, but they found no one. The man had vanished. I told the officers about the person I'd seen the day before, but that was all I could confirm. They said that the man probably knew the family was away on vacation and assumed the house would be empty. What this guy intended to do is still unclear. Honestly, I'm not convinced he broke in and hid in the closet without knowing I was there. I think he knew. That makes it all the more terrifying. Thankfully, Apple noticed him and alerted me. Without her, I don't even want to imagine what might have happened. I live right in the heart of St. Louis, Missouri, a city where the high crime rate is no exaggeration. Every day there are stories about awful things happening all around. Before this night, though, I'd never had anything directly happen to me. I'd never even seen anything firsthand. I always felt like whatever darkness lurked was outside my bubble, so I moved through life trying to stay normal. I worked both Uber Eats and DoorDash, usually on my bike since I was in the city. That day I was doing mostly Uber Eats, and I'd started around dinner time. The weather wasn't great, cloudy, with rain falling off and on, but that's part of the job. The money's not going to make itself. Around 11 p.m., I found myself far from my usual neighborhood, deep in the city's core with rain steadily getting worse. I was thinking about just biking back to reset my location closer to home when an order popped up that was impossible to refuse. $30 for a delivery just 2 minutes away. For context, I was at the edge of the city, where the urban sprawl mixes into more suburban areas dotted with small houses and large apartment buildings. The area wasn't nice by any means, but I'd been there before. I rode up to the restaurant, grabbed the bag, and fastened it securely to my bike. As I was readying to leave, I noticed a car's headlights lighting up the sidewalk nearby. It had been parked there the entire time. I shrugged it off and started biking slowly out of the lot, but as I made a few turns heading into the neighborhood, I saw the headlights following behind me. I told myself it was just a coincidence. But the longer I rode, the more that feeling in my gut tightened. The car was still tailing me. When I finally arrived at the apartment building, old, dilapidated and cracked, I pulled up to the bike rack and locked my bike carefully. Moments later, the car pulled directly into the pier, arcing lot. Now I was really freaking out. Maybe it was still just coincidence, but I couldn't shake the uneasy, sinking dread that this was something else. I grabbed the order and hurried inside, wanting to get this delivery done as fast as possible. I took the creaky elevator up to the second floor and approached the apartment. I knocked on the door. Payment was cash, which was common around here, but always a pain for me. While waiting, I looked down the dimly lit hallway. The walls were peeling paint, ceiling tiles were missing, and patches of mold clung to some corners. The whole place was unnervingly quiet for such a big building, quiet enough that I could hear footsteps climbing the stairs across the hall. I knocked again, but kept my eyes focused on the other end of the hall. My heart began pounding. The air grew thick with tension. Suddenly, 2 men appeared at the far end, walking steadily toward me. Their eyes locked on me, cold, unblinking, burning with menace. The door I was knocking on remained closed. No sounds from inside. I tried to leave, weaving past the men, but they blocked the corridor, pushing me back like I was nothing. Then, with a sudden shove, the door swung open. Another man appeared with the 2. They forced me inside, slamming the door behind me and locking it tight. I screamed for my life, terrified and confused, with no idea what was happening. They threatened me, leading me into a small, bare bedroom with nothing but empty walls. They threw me inside, locked the door, and left me alone with my fear. I sat in the middle of the cold room, hopeless. From the other side of the door I could hear the 3 men whispering. They talked about getting both of us into a car. Both of us? What did that mean? I had no clue. Then screams, no, not theirs, but frantic shouts from police officers outside, shouting commands to open the door. The men didn't resist. After a few minutes, I was freed. It was then I found out there was another victim. 10 minutes before I arrived, they had done the same thing to another delivery person. Apparently, they'd been ordering food, following the drivers, and kidnapping them. A neighbor heard the commotion and called the cops, which is why they arrived so quickly. What their plan was if nobody had shown up, I don't want to imagine. They never said a word about their intentions, so the police could only speculate. From what I was told, this was probably their first attempt at something like this. Hopefully it was their last. I can't even begin to guess what might have happened if the neighbors hadn't been paying attention, if the police hadn't come just in time. I work night shifts at a hospital, specifically in the ER. My role is the front desk, checking people in. Every night here is unpredictable, full of strange and sometimes downright crazy situations. That night started quietly. A few patients came and went, but nothing major. I spent most of the time chatting softly with my co-worker Amy about random things to pass the hours. Around 2 a.m., Amy went on her break to hit the cafeteria, leaving me alone at the front counter. Barely a minute after she left, a man walked through the front doors. He was wearing a black zip-up hoodie and black jeans. His hair was dark and a bit long, scruffy. He looked like he either hadn't showered in days or maybe just woke up. There was something about the way he moved, this strange aura that immediately unsettled me. He approached the counter slowly and said, "I'm looking for Hannah Smith." I didn't remember the exact name, but it was definitely a woman's name. As far as I knew, there was no one by that name admitted recently. Still, I pulled up the records. Nothing. The man shifted uncomfortably while waiting. I told him gently that no one by that name was here and suggested maybe he check other hospitals in the area. He nodded awkwardly and walked out without another word. I glanced at the security guard standing across the room, and we shared a look, both of us silently acknowledging that the guy had been off. Half an hour later, Amy returned. The rest of the shift stayed quiet and slow. I clocked out at 4 a.m., said goodbye to my co-workers, and headed out to the parking lot. The hospital wasn't huge, but the parking lot was massive. Staff were expected to park way in the back to make room for visitors closer to the entrance. As I walked to my car, an eerie feeling came over me. For some reason, I thought back to that strange man from earlier. Maybe it was the dead silence in the lot at King's night. I don't know. I picked up my pace, got to my car, tossed my bag onto the passenger seat and started the engine. The roads home were long and empty, but the strange feeling didn't fade. It felt like I was being watched or followed. I checked my mirrors over and over, but nobody was behind me. When I pulled into my driveway, I felt a sharp surge of relief. I got out, went inside my house, and hadn't even taken my shoes off when suddenly I heard footsteps sprinting toward my porch. They slammed against the door, shaking the handle fiercely, trying to get in. Thankfully, I'd always locked the door instinctively when I closed it. The footsteps stopped. Then a voice, chillingly familiar, called out, "Excuse me, ma'am, please open the door. I need help. Please open the door." It was him, the creepy guy from the hospital. I didn't respond. Shakily, I grabbed my phone and called the cops. Seconds later, the man bolted. I peeked through the peephole, watching him run down the street and disappear into the dark. I was certain it was the same man in the black hoodie and jeans. When the police arrived, they shared what was probably the most terrifying information I've ever heard. The back door to my car in the driveway had been left wide open. He'd been in the back seat the entire time I drove home. That explained how he'd gotten from the hospital to my door so quickly. Even more disturbing, he probably hoped I'd park in my garage that night, which would have given him access to my entire house. Parking in the driveway instead likely saved my life. Using footage from the hospital's CCTV, the police identified the man and caught him a few days later. He was a stranger, and nobody I'd never met. Apparently, he'd been stalking me outside the hospital for weeks, watching to figure out what car I drove and when I accidentally left it unlocked. Even after he was caught, he never comfy.
East to anything. All he would say repeatedly was that he just wanted to talk to me. That was it. This all happened a while ago now. But I haven't heard or seen anything from him since.
I'm a security guard for a mid-sized office building right in the heart of the city. Around here, crime rates run high, so break-ins at night aren't uncommon, and often lead to huge losses for businesses. Usually I have a co-worker with me on shift, but this month I was alone while the company trained a new employee. Honestly, I didn't mind. Being solo was more boring, sure, and it made staying awake tougher, but having a partner could be annoying, depending on who it was. About 2 weeks into the month, I was patrolling the parking lot as usual when I noticed a couple of guys standing across the road, silhouetted in the dark. They were looking my way. I couldn't tell if their eyes were on the building or on me, but either way, it sent a shiver down my spine. The next time I made rounds, they were gone. I filed the image away in my head, but didn't think too much more about it. The rest of the night was quiet. I clocked out at 6 a.m., with nothing else to report. The next few days passed without incident. Then, near the end of the week, as I was doing another outside rounds, there they were again, in precisely the same spot, staring out in the dark. That chilled me. Instead of continuing my rounds, I stayed on their side of the building, pacing back and forth, hoping the sight of me noticing them would scare them off. After about 5 minutes, they finally left. I tried to make out their features, but there was too little light and too much distance. I could barely see anything. I stuck around for another 10 to 15 minutes to make sure they didn't come back. When they didn't, I headed back inside. It was around 1 a.m., so I figured it was a good time to hit the break room for lunch. The break room sat at the far end of a long hallway, the back of the building. I sat at a table, eating and scrolling through my phone, when I suddenly heard a noise. I stopped, put the phone down, and stared at the hallway door. It was a sound I'd never heard before in all my time on the job. After a few seconds, I stood up and walked to the doorway. I stayed there for about 30 seconds trying to listen for anything else. It was eerily quiet. I figured it must have been nothing. I went back and finished my lunch, then checked the security office system for alerts. Everything looked clear. Usually at that time I'd just sit, keep watch, and wait for daylight. But something inside me nudged me to do more. I wanted to figure out what that strange noise was, not nervous so much as curious, and it gave me something to focus on when boredom set in. I started making my rounds again, walking the building's perimeter. The outside was quiet, only the hum of buzzing streetlights filling the air. No people. Back inside, I wandered the halls. Usually, unless there was an alert or flag, I wouldn't methodically check every room. I'd just walk up and down to make sure nothing was out of place. The hallway was long and shaped like an L. On one side was the main entrance, and on the other, a door that led down to a small stairwell with an emergency exit. That door was original to the building, an old heavy metal one that, as far as I knew, wasn't hooked up to the security system. To keep it secured, the company put an enormous padlock on it and bolted it shut, basically taking it out of use. When I got to the end of the hallway and peered through the small window on that door into the stairwell, I was utterly shocked. Utterly. The padlock lay snapped in half on the ground. The heavy metal door itself had been forced open. I felt lightheaded. I rushed back to the security office, heart pounding. If someone had broken in, how the hell did they slip past me unnoticed? There was no way I wouldn't have heard or seen them. I pulled up the security tapes. At the point where I was standing outside watching those two men after they left, I lingered for a bit longer. That's when I saw them circle around to the back of the building. They snapped off the lock and broke in, heading straight for the workrooms. Disturbingly, they were still inside the building when I came back in. One of them was just the other side of a door, literally 2 feet from me, as I walked past and into the break room. While I was there, one of the men accidentally bumped into a desk trying to hide, probably the noise I'd heard earlier. After I went back outside for my rounds, they bolted. On the tapes, it was clear both men carried weapons, either large knives clipped to their belts or possibly even small firearms. It was obvious they'd come prepared, ready to take me down if they had to. I called the police and handed over the footage, but nothing ever came of it. The footage wasn't good quality, and both men's faces were covered. The company reported several hard drives or files missing. Whatever they stole seemed important. They were clearly rattled. But to this day, there's been no new information on who the men were or what their motives were. It was just a typical Friday night after my college classes were done, and I was out doing my usual DoorDash shifts. This was my weekend routine, dashing to help cover my living expenses while I'm on campus. The night started off well. I knocked out a bunch of orders and was making decent money. Then came the slump. After the big dinner rush, orders slowed to almost nothing, and the few that popped up barely paid enough to make it worth the trip. Basically, a waste of time. After an hour of aimlessly driving around, an order finally came through that wasn't too bad. The delivery was about 8 miles away, and the payment made it worth the distance. Not a fortune, but definitely not a rip-off like some others. I accepted the order, dashed into the restaurant to grab the bag, then hopped into my car. The map said it would take about 30 minutes to get there, the longest run I'd done so far. Most of the houses I deliver to are close to campus. Beyond 15 or 20 minutes out, it's almost all empty fields. As I approached the 20-minute mark, the scenery changed. It was nothing but scattered houses, far out, surrounded by sprawling fields of crops and empty land. The last 10 minutes of the drive was along an empty dirt road winding through farms. Finally, I arrived. There was a dirt driveway off the main road leading through a huge field, and way in the back sat a small, lonely house. Driving across the field felt strange, not my usual territory, and though I don't get nervous easily, something about this place made my skin crawl. The only sound was the quiet rumble of my car tires on the dirt. I parked out front, grabbed the bag, but left the car running. The night was quiet. The house was dark, except for a porch light illuminating the entrance. I trudged through unkempt grass and walked up to the porch, knocking on the door. While waiting, I glanced back at my car sitting alone, in the darkness, with the endless pitch-black field stretching behind it. No answer. I knocked again, louder this time. Still nothing. No sounds from inside. At that moment, a chilling realization hit me. The house looked decayed up close, run down and forgotten. The only thing convincing me it wasn't abandoned was that I had an order for this address, plus the porch light was on. But why would that be the only light? Then something clicked. I walked closer to the light fixture and recognized the top portion, a cheap solar battery pack. That meant it was an automatic light, charging during the day and turning on at night. No one needed to be there to flip the switch. Just as I was piecing that together, I heard a rumbling sound behind me. I whipped around. A car was threshing down the dirt path coming up behind my ride. I froze, staring right at the headlights. A man stepped out. I yelled from the porch, "Is this your order?" No reply. The man just stood there beside his car. No movement. No words. My adrenaline surged as a cold wave of fear washed over me. The silence of the night slapped me hard with the truth. I was utterly alone, stuck in the middle of a vast field between an empty house and a stranger. In a flash, instinct kicked in. I dropped the bag and sprinted off the porch, running behind the house directly into the tall field grasses. I looked back to see the man charging after me, frantic and fast. I kept running, plunging deeper into the field, the grass growing taller and thicker until it swallowed every direction from view. By then, I knew there was no way he could follow me. I slowed my pace, catching my breath, moving quietly through the crops, hoping he wouldn't find me if he kept searching. Eventually, I made it to someone else's yard, and from there found a road with enough signal to call for help. The police picked me up and went back to check on my car. The man was long gone by then. I was surprised to see my car untouched. Nothing stolen. The bag was still sitting on the porch of the abandoned house. That meant the man had intentions far worse than theft. My name's Caleb Fletcher, and this happened about 8 or 9 months ago on August the 24th, a Saturday. School had been back in session for a couple of weeks, and I was just trying to de-stress. I wanted to see if my friends, let's call them Griffin and Broly, wanted to hop on Fortnite and play. My mum and sister were out shopping and my dad was at work. I was bored. Around 8 p.m. we finally got online to play. I had tried to make pizza rolls beforehand, but I burned the batch. Classic move. After a few rounds, it was clear my friends were getting tired of the losing streak, so they logged off after about an hour. I was planning to lie down and scroll on my phone before heading to bed. That plan changed when I heard my 2 dogs barking outside. It's not unusual. They bark at people walking down the road all the time. But I looked out anyway, just in case. Seconds after I glanced out the window, I heard our garage door open and then close. Normally that means my dad's home, but I didn't see his van outside. He'd texted me earlier, saying he would be working late. Unease settled over me. I decided to walk downstairs into the dining room for a better view. From the window, the driveway looked empty. No people. No cars. Nothing. I wasn't the type to investigate alone, so I ran back upstairs and messaged the family group chat to ask if anyone was home. I told my mum about hearing the garage door. She told me to turn off the lights, lock my bedroom door, and stay put until she got home. So I did. About 15 minutes later, I thought I heard the wooden floor creak downstairs. Quiet, sneaky footsteps. I didn't have any weapon, so I grabbed my microphone's boom arm from my desk.
anything to defend myself.
I quietly cracked open my bedroom door and stepped out onto our upstairs balcony. I scanned the area, watching for anything suspicious, anyone hiding nearby. I was stupid enough to yell, "Is anybody there?" like they'd answer me. Everything seemed fine until I saw a large silhouette standing right underneath the balcony. Panic surged through me and I bolted to the nearest room with a door, my small bathroom. The intruder must have known I noticed him because I heard loud, fast footsteps running up our stairs. I locked myself in. I'd stupidly left my phone in my bedroom right next door. After gathering every ounce of courage, I bolted into my bedroom, locking the door behind me. My sister's room was right across from mine, and its door was wide open. That's when I figured the intruder must have been in there. After locking my door tight, I grabbed my phone and typed 911. Just before I pressed call, I saw the storage room in my wall, the one with a hidden door, was slightly open. Through the crack, I saw a dark brown eye staring right at me, burning into my soul. Pure terror ripped through me. It's a feeling I'll never forget. I didn't hesitate. I booked it down the stairs and bolted out the front door, sprinting up the hill to my neighbor's house. He was a police officer. He alerted backup while I stayed with his wife. He went down to investigate. I told him exactly where the intruder was hiding, in my bedroom. Minutes later, I returned. When I walked inside, I saw my neighbor pinning a tall, skinny man with a grey beard and a dirty black coat to the floor, handcuffing him. Since then, I'm not allowed to be home alone anymore. We've added better security systems around the house. My family was just grateful I was safe, and they were incredibly thankful for my neighbor's bravery. I wouldn't wish an experience like that on anyone, not even my worst enemy.
I'm a manager at a mid-sized grocery store, working mostly overnight shifts that last about 10 hours. At the time, the store was seriously understaffed. Every department was stretched thin, including overnight stocking. I had one guy who helped me 5 nights a week, but this particular night he wasn't working. It was his day off, so I was alone. I got to work around 10 p.m., and by 10:15, I was the only one there. After running some numbers in the office, I started pulling out loads of boxes to stock the aisles. No breaks, no help. Just me hustling to get everything done as fast as I could. Suddenly, a tapping noise echoed through the store. I stopped and listened. Then it happened again. It sounded just like someone tapping on one of the front windows. I glanced at my watch. It was 2 a.m. Time had flown by, but no one should have been there at this hour. I walked down the aisle toward the front and quickly spotted someone leaning against the window. He was trying to look inside. When he noticed me, he stared hard from the other side of the glass. I asked what he wanted. He looked homeless, unkempt, dirty, and told me to open the door. He had a straight, blank face. No smile, no emotion. I told him the store was closed, and he couldn't be here. He turned to walk away. Then suddenly his fist slammed hard against the window. Not just tapping anymore, but angry, harsh, banging. I looked sharply at him and could see he was enraged. His fist pressed against the glass, pounding like he was losing his mind. I warned him I'd call the cops if he didn't leave. I started pulling my phone out, showing him I meant business. Only then did he back off. But that angry glare never left his eyes. He walked away into the parking lot. Seeing him leave, I put my phone away and tried to focus on my work. We got all kinds of crazy customers, and honestly, I didn't want to get distracted more than I knew. He did too. About 15 minutes later, a sudden sharp noise cut through the store. It sounded like metal snapping or scraping. I dropped what I was doing and ran to the front immediately. Nobody was at the windows. I went straight for the entrance. It was one of those revolving glass doors that uses a bolt lock on the top to keep it locked when the store is closed. Right away, I saw the bolt was missing. Not just unlocked, it was completely gone. I pressed my hand against the door. It spun easily, allowing anyone to get in. I could feel my face go white as it dawned on me what was happening. I knew I needed to call the police, immediately. But before I could turn toward the front office, I looked up and saw the same homeless guy. He was only a few feet from me,
eyes still burning with that enraged stare. I didn't hesitate. I ran out through the revolving door, hearing him close behind me. Out in the parking lot, an old van roared up fast and nearly hit me, but I didn't slow down. I kept running until I finally reached my car and locked myself inside. The guy wasn't chasing me anymore. The van sped out of the parking lot and disappeared. I called the cops right away and spent the next few hours explaining everything that had happened. The next day we got the security footage of the break-in. The image quality was bad, not great, but from what we could tell, they were trying to get me into that van. Why? We don't know. I'm sure if I hadn't been quick that night, I probably wouldn't have been seen again. I was driving a truckload to a company on the far west coast, coming all the way from the east coast. Cross-country hauls like this were nothing new for me. I've been trucking for almost 20 years and I've done this route countless times. The roads, the truck stops, the routine, it's always the same. Over those 20 years I'd seen some odd things, sure, but nothing that ever really shook me. So when I hit the road this time, I had no worries. Just another day at work. About 20 hours into the drive, a storm began rolling in, slowing me down. It was late, and I was already looking for my next truck stop to get some sleep. Then, out of nowhere, a sudden light appeared behind me. I was on a flat, straight stretch of road, so I should have seen them coming in the mirror. But it happened all at once. They were right on my tail. At first, I thought maybe they'd just turned their lights on. I kept my eyes glued to the mirror as the car closed in, getting so close the trailer blocked them entirely. All I could see was the reflection of their headlights glowing on the back of the trailer. Then, the lights went out. I kept my speed steady, checking the mirrors again and again, trying to see if they were still there. But with the rain pouring hard and the darkness swallowing the road, there was no way to know. Someone turning off their lights in the middle of a storm? That's insane. Being tailgated that closely? Just as insane. Thank God a sign appeared. Truck stop 5 miles ahead. At least I was close to getting away from whatever the hell this was. I tried not to jump to conclusions. Maybe it was nothing. But after years on the road, you learn to be suspicious when things feel off, especially alone, at night. Over those 5 miles, I didn't see any sign they were still behind me. Still, I stayed on edge. The storm, the rain, it all made it hard to see. I pulled into the truck stop, checking the mirrors for any sign of them. It was mostly empty, just a few trucks at the pumps. I parked in the middle of the lot, peeled off my gear, and got ready to rest. I opened the truck door and leaned out, peering down the side of the trailer. The rain drenched me in seconds. From what I could tell, no car was behind me. I closed the door, locked it tight, grabbed my pillow and blanket, and settled in. I switched off the truck and tried to fall asleep. The storm pounding on the metal roof covered any sounds of vehicles coming and going, but sometime later, I woke with a start. I felt like I'd only been asleep a few minutes. The storm raged on. Before I could even check the mirrors, a loud thump shook the truck. My eyes snapped open wider. I reached for the door handle and pushed it open slowly. Through the curtain of rain, I barely made out the outline of a car, headlights off, with 2 men moving around in front of it. Fear gripped me. I hesitated to step out and confront them. And as I sat there frozen, the door suddenly slammed back against me, shoving me further into the driver's seat. Another man stood outside, yelling at me to stay put, slamming the door repeatedly. His right hand was deep inside his hoodie pocket. With 2 other men lurking behind the truck, I was trapped. No chance to fight back. I could feel the truck shaking under their presence. The man outside didn't even glance away. He watched my every move. Time dragged on like that for minutes, every second stretching into an eternity. Then, suddenly, they ran back to their car and sped away. I sat there, still in shock, watching the car vanish onto the road. I called the police and filed a report. No updates ever came on the men's identities. All I know is that if I'd been any less alert, if I had tried to drive off the moment I spotted them, I doubt I'd have gotten out of there safe. This happened back in 2016. My parents had just moved to the West Coast, and I was driving out there to visit them. Most of the drive was through empty stretches, just a few gas stations scattered down the long highway. During my second night on the road, my check engine light came on. I wasn't surprised. My car was old and unreliable, but I wasn't really a car person, so I had no clue what was wrong. I looked up the next gas station on my map, about 30 miles away. I had no choice but to make it there, but my car had other plans. The engine suddenly cut out, and I started coasting along the shoulder of the road until I came to a stop. I did everything I could to get it started again. I even popped the hood and looked around for obvious issues, but I couldn't find anything. Honestly, I thought this was the end for that car. All I could do was wait and try to find help. I pulled out my phone, but my stomach sank. No service. I tried to call anyway. Nothing went through. After about 30 minutes of trying to figure out what to do, I realized I had only one option: hitchhike. I'd never done it before. I was nervous, unsure what to expect. For some reason, I always thought hitchhiking was something I'd never do. So there I was, standing on the side of the road, waiting. Every 15 minutes or so, a car would pass. None stopped. Hours went by like that. It was probably 2 or 3 a.m. before headlights appeared again. I stuck my thumb out, expecting the driver to just keep going like all the others. But this time, they slowed and pulled over. It was a black pickup truck. I couldn't really see the driver until I walked around. He was a skinny man with a long, thin face and long black hair. It was a bit unsettling. "Need a lift?" he said, with a big, almost too happy grin. Something about him didn't sit right, but I was tired and desperate. This might have been my only chance. I got in the back seat. To break the awkward silence, I tried to make small talk. "What are you up to tonight?" "Just cruising the highway," he said, like it was a hobby. It was strange. Middle of nowhere, and he wasn't asking me any questions. I tried to think of another question to keep the conversation going, but he cut me off. He looked at me in the rearview mirror for a long moment. "You don't have any weapons on you, right?" "Just making sure I'm safe," he said, flashing that odd smile. I said no, feeling the question was strange, but maybe he was just cautious. After that, I stopped talking. 10 minutes passed. I stared out the window, heart pounding. Then suddenly, the truck turned off the highway and onto a dirt road. I sat up, alarm bells ringing in my mind. Where were we going? He glanced over his shoulder quickly but didn't answer. I asked louder, fear rising, "Where are you taking me?" I knew, any second now, when the truck stopped, I had to bolt. I braced myself with my hand on the door handle. The dirt road led deeper into the woods. A small farmhouse appeared in fading light. Its front door was wide open. The place looked decayed and falling apart. Suddenly, he slammed on the brakes. I jolted forward. The man flung his door open and rushed around to the side door. I threw my own door open and bolted right for the trees. He chased after me close behind. Out of sight inside the darkness, I could only hear his footsteps. I ducked behind a tree and held my breath. He ran past me, deeper into the woods. A minute passed. Then his voice, creepy and relentless, called out, "Come on, let's go back. I'll give you a ride. I wasn't trying to scare you." The same chilling tone, repeating over and over. I never heard his footsteps retreating. I had no idea if he was still lurking, waiting somewhere in the dark. I knew I had to leave. Quietly, I started walking toward what I hoped was the main road. I couldn't see a thing. But once deep inside the woods, I pulled out my phone and turned the screen brightness down low. Somehow, I had signal. I almost cried from relief. I called 911 and had them track my location. Thank God, I made it back to the main road and met 2 officers. By then, the man and his car were gone. I have no idea how he slipped away without being seen. The farmhouse? It was just what it looked like, an old abandoned wreck. What creeps me out most is that the man knew exactly where it was and turned off purposefully. I don't know what would have happened if I hadn't gotten away, and honestly, I'm grateful I never had to find out. This happened just a few months ago. I was spending the weekend cozying up inside as winter was winding down, the last few cold days before the weather was supposed to warm up. That night it was rainy and cold, perfect weather to stay in, watch some movies and relax. But not long after dinner there was a knock at the door. I got up and cautiously made my way over. Peering through the peephole, I didn't recognize the man on the other side. He wore a brown jacket and a beanie, and in his hands was a snow shovel. Odd, considering there was no snow on the ground. I cracked the door just an inch and asked what he wanted. It took me all of 5 seconds listening to him to realize he was up to no good. He stumbled over his words, spinning a tale about being a friendly guy looking for any yard work or jobs he could do. Something felt off, unnatural. I said no thanks and started shutting the door, but then the man suddenly put his hand on it, holding it open for a moment, just staring at me. Finally, he let go. I shut the door and locked it tight. Once I processed what had just happened, I looked back out the window. He was walking down the sidewalk, disappearing into the rainy fog. I kept watching for a minute, making sure he was really gone. Then I went back to my movie. The guy was definitely sketchy, but I didn't think he'd come back or do anything else. I figured he'd just move on to the next house. The rain started pouring harder over the next hour. I was still in the living room, trying to focus on another movie, even though I was too tired to finish it. My eyes were drifting in and out. Then a sudden thump from above jolted me awake. It was just one thump, hard to tell how loud exactly with rain pounding on the roof. What was strange was it definitely came from right above me. I got up and walked upstairs to check things out, looking for anything knocked over or a leak in the ceiling that might explain the noise. But I found nothing. Maybe it was a gutter clicking loose from the heavy rain or some other harmless sound, so I ignored it and went back downstairs. Now more awake, I decided to finish the movie. By the time it ended, it was nearly midnight. I shut off the TV and went around turning off all the lights downstairs. As I climbed the stairs to go to bed, I suddenly felt the temperature drop noticeably near the top of the steps. Maybe I was too tired to think much of it. Then as I started closing the doors I had left open earlier, something caught my eye from the corner of one of the rooms. A window was cracked open. I must have stared for a good 10 seconds. It felt impossible. I was extremely confused. I went over to take a closer look. This window had a small roof overhang beneath it. Before closing it, I noticed an imprint on the window seal, a faint shoe print. My blood ran cold. I turned around and just listened. The low creaking of the house mixed with the rain pattering on the roof only made me feel more unnerved. I knew without a doubt that someone was inside my house. I began moving slowly and quietly back into the hallway. Every other door was still open, and it felt as if someone's eyes could be watching me even now from one of those open rooms. I made it downstairs safely, where I grabbed my phone and hid in the garage. I called 911. It took about 5 minutes for the first officer to arrive. During that time, I heard nothing but the rain. When I let the officer in, I waited anxiously on the porch as he searched the house. About 2 minutes later, he called out from upstairs. He came down holding a man in handcuffs. I immediately recognized him as the man who had come to my door earlier that night. His face was twisted with anger as he was pushed into the squad car. Putting all the pieces together, the officer explained that the man had climbed onto my roof. That was likely the cause of the thump I'd heard hours earlier. He then entered through that second-story window I'd never thought to lock. Most disturbing, the man had been hiding in my master bedroom, the very room I was just moments away from entering and maybe falling asleep in, completely unaware he was there. He had even taken his shoes off after climbing through the window to avoid leaving fresh prints on the carpet. The fact I noticed that tiny shoe imprint on the window seal, it's nothing short of a miracle. With him going directly for my bedroom, his intentions were clear and malicious. Thankfully, the judge agreed with that. It's only been a few months since, but I still have sleepless nights where I can't shake the feeling someone is hiding inside my home, even when I'm alone. It was late at night, driving back from my friend's place in Wisconsin. I live just outside Chicago. It's about a 6-hour drive, so I decided to do it all in one go. I didn't expect to leave so late, 8 p.m., but I had to be home for work the next day, so there was no time to hang out longer. If you're not familiar with Wisconsin, it's mostly flat land, with tons of forests up north and small towns scattered around. The bigger cities are nearer the border, nowhere close to where I was. My buddy's place was one of those small towns, so right from the start, I was driving through barren forest roads. There were a few cars here and there, but once I hit about 30 minutes out and the sun had set, I didn't see another vehicle. I probably went 2 whole hours without seeing a single other car. The endless flat forest on either side started blending together, the repetition almost hypnotic and making me sleepy. It didn't help that I was already pretty tired from the weekend with my friend. I tried everything to stay awake. Then around 11 p.m. I saw something up ahead. I opened my eyes wider and saw a person standing on the shoulder with their thumb out, clearly hitchhiking. For some reason, my first thought was that having company might help keep me awake. Almost instinctively, I slowed down. As I got closer, the person began walking toward my car. I rolled down the window and pulled up alongside. "Hey," he said, voice tired. "I just need a ride into the next town. You've got a spare seat?" It was really dark, so I couldn't see much of him, but his tone sounded genuine enough. I let him into the back seat. Once I started pulling away, the thought hit me. Why was he out here, in the middle of the woods, so late at night? I looked in the rearview mirror. The guy was staring at me from the shadows of the back seat. Around 30, stubble on a buzz cut. No backpack or anything with him. "What brought you out here?" I asked. He shifted a fake smile across his face. "Oh, I was walking on a trail in the woods. Got lost, found the road. Figured I'd catch a ride." I thought for a second. I didn't know of any trails anywhere near here. And even if there were, he must have driven to get here. Why didn't he ask me to take him to the trailhead? Why was he heading into town instead? I was more awake now. Unease was settling in. Suddenly he said, "Stop." I hesitated. He told me to pull over and drop him off. I did, cautiously easing the truck to the shoulder and parking. We were maybe 5 miles from where I picked him up. Still nothing but dense forest all around. He opened the door and without a word started rushing into the woods. I was super weirded out. Concerned. At that point, I just wanted to leave. He left the door open. I leaned back to shut it and noticed a drawstring bag tucked under the passenger seat. It wasn't mine. Definitely his. I called after him. He turned around, eyes wide, frustrated, staring at me like I'd caught him. "Your bag, you left it right here," I said, pointing under the seat. He hesitated for several seconds before grabbing it abruptly and running back into the forest. I slammed the door and took off as fast as I could. I was relieved to be away from him, knowing something was seriously off. But only a few minutes down the road, a terrible smell hit me from the back seat. It grew worse over the next 30 minutes. When I finally hit another small town, I stopped at a gas station. Using my phone light, I checked the back seat carpet under the passenger seat, where the bag had been sitting. There was a deep red stain. I almost threw up. I ran inside and called the police. I gave them all the details I could. They cut out a piece of the carpet for testing. They searched the wooded area where I picked him up, but only found a few footprints. "Nate, I don't know what was in that bag. Whatever it was, it seemed like the man tried to plant it in my car to cover something up. We still don't know who he was or what he was really up to that night." I was working a quick DoorDash shift on a Monday night. I got out of my day job at 7 p.m. and decided to make a few deliveries. It was a pretty regular, quiet night, with nothing unusual to report. I delivered about 7 or 8 orders before taking my last one for the night. I drove to the house, dropped off the food, then started heading back into town where my apartment was. It was around 10 p.m., and I was about 20 minutes out, driving through the farmland that surrounds our town. A couple of minutes into my drive, I spotted a figure standing right in the middle of the road. I slowed down, but the man only moved a little, not enough to get completely out of my way. As I got closer, he looked straight at me and stuck his thumb out in my headlights. I could tell he was in his early 50s, maybe older, with a large backpack slung over his shoulders. Since I was already slowing down, I figured I'd be helpful and asked if he needed a ride into the city. I was heading that way anyway. He leaned on the windowsill and thanked me, eyes heavy and exhausted like he hadn't slept in days. He seemed nice enough, so I agreed. What I didn't expect was for him to immediately open the passenger door and climb into the seat right next to me. I mean, it didn't really matter, but it felt like common courtesy to sit in the back. As he settled in, I glanced past him. Behind where he'd come from was a vast field of tall grass, as though it was a huge farm or something. "Are you from around here?" I asked. "What brings you out to the farmlands?" He looked over at me and said, "Just making my way across the country to visit my family. Don't have a car, so I've been hitching rides." I thought that was pretty interesting. I asked more about where he was from, but his answers were vague and uninterested. A few times I caught him looking into the back seat. Not quick glances, but like he was running his eyes. Yes, all over, searching for something. Something about him started making me feel off. He wasn't talking much and just acted really unusual. "Is everything okay?" I asked, keeping my eyes on the road. He said nothing. When I looked over at him again, his stare unsettled me. That's when I noticed something chilling, a knife clenched tight in his right hand. "Stop the car," he said. I didn't say a word and pulled the truck to a stop right in the middle of the road. I was terrified. I told myself if I just let him take whatever he wanted, I'd get out of it unharmed. So that's what I was planning. As soon as the truck stopped, I turned to open my door. He quickly grabbed me, shoving me back in. "Get in the back," he demanded, still holding the knife. I froze, realizing that we were surrounded by empty fields. If I got into the back, I'd probably never have another chance to escape. He told me again to get in the back. That's when I noticed his large backpack was slightly open by his feet. I could see a thick bundle of rope packed inside. I knew I had no choice but to try my luck now, before it was too late. One swift motion, I opened the door and jumped out of the truck. He lunged after me, trying to jump across the front seat to grab me. I sprinted to the other side of the road and dove into the tall grass. I kept running through the field until I was sure he couldn't find me. Then I stood still, listening. He yelled a few times from the road, but then everything went quiet. All I could hear was the wind blowing through the tall grass. I stayed motionless for a full 15 minutes before slowly making my way back to the road. Scanning through the grass, I saw my headlights still shining on the pavement. The driver's door was still open. The man was nowhere in sight. After looking around for another minute, I sprinted up, grabbed my phone and dashed back into the grass. I called 911 immediately. I didn't know if he was still hidden somewhere waiting for me. I refused to risk staying out in the open. Eventually, the police showed up. I still can't believe the guy didn't drive away in my car. He must have just grabbed his backpack and run off. Maybe tried chasing me through the fields but couldn't find me. Either way, it was clear his intentions went way beyond robbery. That thought alone makes the whole situation 100 times more disturbing. I gave the cops a description of the man. But so far, no sightings, no leads. I work as a maintenance worker for a small business that runs all its operations during the day, so I cover overnight shifts. It makes my job easier since I don't have to work around anyone, and they don't have to work around me. Technically, it's just part-time. I usually work from 8 p.m. to midnight on weekdays. That night, I arrived a little late, but clocked in right away and got to work. About an hour later, as I was cleaning off one of the desks, the phone in the front of the building started ringing. The place was closed, so I didn't think it was anything for me. I just let it ring through. But then it rang again, and again, and again. I knew it couldn't be my boss or anyone else who worked there. They would have just texted or called my cell. Plus, the service had stopped at 6 p.m., and it was already around 9 p.m. After the 5th time, I walked up to the front desk and checked the caller ID. It just said, "Unknown caller." I debated whether to mute the phone or answer and tell whoever it was that we were closed. In the end, I didn't want to deal with it and decided to mute it. I walked away and kept cleaning. About 30 minutes passed, and I'd completely forgotten about the phone. I assumed whoever it was had given up. It was nearly 10 p.m., and I was upstairs taking a break in the small coffee room when I suddenly heard a beep. A single electronic beep sound I'd never heard before. At first I didn't think much of it. Then I heard a door open and close. I immediately turned my head toward the stairwell and froze. Who on earth could possibly be coming into the building at this hour? It was way too late. I was nervous, but hoped whoever it was just a worker who forgot something. I walked over to the open stairwell and listened carefully before calling out, "Hello? Is someone down there?" I heard footsteps abruptly stop. "Hello?" I called again. Tension slowly filled my body as worry crept in about what might be happening. Then more footsteps approached the bottom of the stairs. I quietly leaned over the railing and looked down at the doorway. There was a shadow. A man. He was standing still, just a foot or two from the entrance, as if waiting for me. After several unnerving seconds, I backed away and moved further into the coffee room. Quietly, I pulled out my phone and called 911. I hid behind the bar table, whispering to the operator, staring hard at the empty stairwell. It took only a couple of minutes for the first officer to arrive. I heard him yelling, "Everyone come out!" No one answered. He carefully made his way all the way upstairs, but found no one. We didn't hear anything more that night. The only answers came later, when we reviewed the security footage. Disturbingly, the man was shown standing at the bottom of the stairwell, holding a knife and looking completely unfazed by anything around him. He didn't seem to have come in with the intention of hurting me. In fact, it looked like he had no idea I was there until I called out. But once he realized I was there, it was clear he was 100% willing to cause harm if I came his way. After a few minutes, and just before the police arrived, he calmly left the building through the front door. The biggest mystery? How he got a key card to unlock that door. That's what the beep was. The sound of the door unlocking. Even I didn't have a key card. I only had a normal metal key. The search for the man is still ongoing, and I still work there. Honestly, I hope it was a one-time thing. But some nights that uneasy feeling, it never leaves me.